I'm on the phone with Rick Jasper, a very interesting man who has a very interesting story, and he's going to tell us about how he got into business of making a TurboGrafx arcade board. Hello, Rick.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a hardware and software designer. I got my start back in 1979, and pretty much every path my life has taken me on in my career has been accidental. And it's interesting. Life has kind of taken me where it wanted to take me, and this is the culmination of everything that I've done in my life. I started the whole thing when I was about 12 years old. I used to go to work with my dad, and I went. He had a factory in downtown LA, and we used to, you'd park somewhere, and then had to walk a mile wherever you wanted to go in the city. And we passed a Radio Shack, and I bought a kit radio, and I tried to solder it together, and I destroyed it. But I was so curious about what it was that I got into electronics, and I started subscribing to magazines like Popular Electronics. And one thing I discovered very quickly is that when you're trying to build somebody else's project, you quickly realize that there are parts that you can't get. So I decided the only way I was going to be able to design things efficiently was to design them myself. So I took it upon myself to learn electronics, and I got pretty proficient at it. And after a while, I was able to design microprocessor circuits. And then I realized at that point that I wasn't going to go any farther unless I knew how to program. So then I took it to the next level, and I started doing hardware and software. And my first experiment in that foray was converting a haunted house pinball machine to be a multi-ball. And that was pretty successful. So I started doing other circuits, and before I knew it, I was in the arcade game business. When I was in high school, I sat next to a guy in one of my classes whose father was a distributor. He was a route operator for arcade games. And I mentioned to him that I was interested in electronics and design, and he gave me an arcade catalog from his father, and I started buying parts from there, and I started building kits, and by the time I was 17 years old, I had built a full-size Pac-Man arcade machine from scratch. And so I started doing arcade projects and redemption games. And
before we get too far ahead, though, can you tell me about designing the Pac-Man from scratch? You just programmed the game by yourself? Did it look exactly the same as a Pac-Man? Did it play different? Did you build a cabinet for it?
I built the cabinet, I did the wiring, and I built the circuit board from scratch using the schematics that I had. Because there was a company that used to exist called C.A. Robinson, and you could buy any schematic for any game that you wanted. And so I picked up a schematic for a Pac-Man and ended up building myself a machine. And I discovered that I had a great love for amusement games.
When you built this and you showed it off to people, what did they say? It must have been pretty amazing.
Well, my parents were very proud, and we'd have parties, and their friends would go, "What, you built that? Really? Wow." And because I was 17 years old, I was a kid. When I was 15 years old, I could repair an office copy machine. So I always had a knack for electronics, like maybe an intuition for it. So it was really, I must say, what I felt I was meant to do in life.
Did you get into any legal issues with designing this by yourself? Or was this just like a personal project just for your home? Did you try to sell this?
I never tried to sell that Pac-Man machine. This was something I did for myself for entertainment. I never intended to market it, so I never got in any, nobody cared what I did in my own home.
All right, so then what happens next after that?
After I built this game, I started doing arcade repair. One of the interesting things that happened in California, where I used to live, at the height of the arcade game boom, when the Asteroids and the Pac-Mans and the Donkey Kongs were very popular, the state of California discovered that they could tax the machines. So they put an annual tax on every arcade game in every store. Because I was doing repair for I literally did arcade game repair for almost everybody in Southern California. I discovered one of the big complaints that these arcade operators had was that they didn't want to pay that annual tax on every single game. So I came up with a 4-in-1 game system that would allow an arcade operator to put 4 games in one cabinet. And because I have a twisted sense of humor, I named it Foreplay.
Do you know how much that tax was for each arcade machine?
I think it was $250 a year per machine. If you have a route with 500 games on it, well, you can imagine the cost on that.
So you made these machines with the idea that I guess you'd be saving $750 a year, or
$750, correct. And not to mention the fact that many of the stores had a restriction where you could only put 4 games in the store. So the combination of the taxes and the game restrictions, well, all of a sudden you can put 16 games now in the same store. So I started advertising this product in Replay magazine. So I started selling this system, and I got in touch with, actually they got in touch with me. A company named United Amusements was involved with NEC. And you know what? I never asked them how they got involved, but they needed someone who could engineer a product for them. And because I was already doing that, they asked me if I wanted to get involved in that.
And what year was this?
This was 1992, I'm going to say.
Okay, so this was after the TurboGrafx was out and out for a while.
I got involved in the project, and the point man for NEC was a man named Ken Wirt. He was the vice president NEC in America. Initially he sent us 50 units. We weren't using TurboGrafx. We were using PC engines. The funny thing was that the PC engine had better games than the TurboGrafx did. And the entire time that I was dealing with this project, I was playing games that average Americans couldn't play. And I scratched my head the whole time wondering why NEC had introduced a brand new system. TurboGrafx was a great system. I mean, it was ahead of its time. But the problem was the games that they released in America were not their best games. And they only released a handful of them. And here I was playing the Japanese version, the PC Engine, and I was playing great Japanese titles, and I was scratching my head wondering why they weren't releasing these in America. So they really shot themselves in the foot on that, because as I recall, they introduced the TurboGrafx-16 after the Christmas season with only a handful of games, and they weren't even the best games. So it was a recipe for disaster.
Well, we could go around and around for that forever as to what happened. But I do remember reading a lot of game magazines around this time, and the import section was always what I turned to first, because we wanted to see what would be coming over from Japan or what would not be coming over. And it was like two different worlds. You saw all these amazing games, the ones that are very obvious, like Castlevania and Street Fighter 2, and they were never ever going to come to America.
I had a lot of fun playing these games, and the whole idea was that NEC wanted me to convert the PC Engine for the coin-op market in America. So kids in the arcades would be playing the Japanese version, and kids at home would be playing the American version.
That's unusual.
Yeah, so I guess that I don't know what they're thinking of for that was, but they wanted to keep those two markets separate.
You mean that they would be playing games that were only released in Japan in the arcade?
Correct. And so that was one of the things that made Nintendo so popular, even though the games were not as good, is that, you could play. Nintendo had Punch-Out, and they had, the Versus games, and you could play those in the arcade, and then suddenly you can play the same games at home. And all the kids loved that. Well, that was not true with PC Engine. All those games that you saw in the arcade, you couldn't play them at home. You could never see them anywhere else. And, well, that's a double-edged sword, because the ability to play those games at home destroyed the coin-op market. But on the other hand, the lack of mutual support in the two industries also killed the market.
Well, I want to get back on track to the machine.
Well, we were in limited production at the time. NEC was not providing us in the quantities that we needed to make this happen, and the production was going slower than it. Kind of became a moderate success before it fizzled out. And the way that it worked was that I built an interface board that would allow the machine to be ported into a standard arcade CRT with coin op and all that, so you could literally play it by coin.
So how many units were made of this machine? You said it was not enough that you needed to make it successful. How many did they build?
I'd say about maybe 350 of them. But the other problem, this was a big problem, is that even though the games were good, the PC Engine games for the arcade, they were in Japanese. And that made it hard too, because a lot of the writing was in a language the kids didn't understand. And that was another issue because, well, when you're trying to play an arcade game and everything is in another language, what are you going to do? So that was another big problem we had. These games should have been converted over to an American format.
Now, were you able to access any of the game code, or was this just the interface that you were dealt with?
We had access to a cartridge design that allowed us to put those games on EEPROM. And so we had literally a long EEPROM cartridge that would plug into the game, that would play the same games that were on these little cartridges. And the interesting thing was that the only difference between the Japanese version and the American version as far as cartridge compatibility, the data bus was swapped. So literally D0 through D7 were reversed.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, so literally, if they wanted to, if anybody had ever found out about that, they could have made one of these long EEPROM cartridges that I'm talking about, and they could have rewired it to play any version of the game they wanted. But most kids aren't going to know how to do that.
There are 350 or so machines made and out there. Where were they? Because I've never even heard of this. Where were they located?
They were located in arcades and convenience stores, as I recall. I was not involved in the distribution end of it. This was the job of United Amusements, the company that I told you about that contacted us.
Okay, but you said like arcades, of course, but what cities or what states did these go to?
California, I would say. I mean, I never asked, but I'm pretty sure most of them went to California. But they could have gone anywhere. They could have gone anywhere because United Amusements was a distributor of arcade games nationwide. So,
what did the machines look like on the outside? Was it clear that there was any kind of TurboGrafx or PC Engine branding? Or
I mean, it looked like a standard arcade game with TurboGrafx graphics on it. So it looked like any upright arcade game.
Okay, but it did say TurboGrafx on the cabinet?
I'm pretty sure it did, yes.
Okay, so you did talk before about how these games were never intended to be brought home to play. So I think that's sending kind of a confusing message because you see this, and if you're aware of what TurboGrafx is, then you go to the store and say, I saw this game at the arcade, where is it? And then it's not there.
Correct. They were alienating their customers before they ever got to enjoy the games.
Okay, so how long was this production run? How long did this partnership last? When did it end?
I'd say 6 months, 6 to 8 months, and then it was done. So it never, I mean, it never went very far in the arcade game market, really any much more than it did in the home market. But it was a great concept though. But we didn't have the titles. There were problems involved in getting this done, but I wasn't on the marketing side of it. I was on the production side of it. I was just selling the units to them, and they were doing whatever they wanted to with them. They were conversion kits as well. If I remember, they could take an existing arcade game, gut it, and put one of these into it.
I wanted to ask if you could just take PC Engine cards and just switch them out and change the game to whatever you like.
You could.
What about CDs?
No, we never got into that. It was all cartridges. All cartridges.
Okay, well, it sounds pretty interesting. I really wish I could have experienced one of these at the time. I was a huge TurboGrafx fan. It would have just been amazing to see this at an arcade. But if 350 or so units were made and they're still out there, I have never found anybody who says that they own one. And I follow the TurboGrafx pretty closely, but I have never ever met anybody who has claimed to have one of these machines. What happened to them? Where do you think they are?
I have no idea, because once I got rid of them and they went to United Amusements, I never saw them again. So I'm not aware of the history of them after that. I do know that they went out to wherever they went. I'm pretty sure most of them stayed in the United States, though.
Now, you said that you could take out old arcade parts and put this in and swap it out. Do you think that some of these were dismantled and turned into other games, turned into something else?
That's quite possible, because when it comes to arcade games, nothing was sacred. When games would burn out or whatever, they would be gutted and they would be turned into something else most of the time.
Well, that's a shame if no units exist at all anymore. I'd like to see one of them pop up for people to experience and have it documented. So this ended around 1993? Was this 92 or 93 when you stopped?
Probably 90. I would say 93. I had one of those units for years after that in storage, and then eventually I think I just lost it or tossed it or something, because I don't really play a lot of arcade games anymore. But yeah, I had one of those for a while. It's a shame I got rid of it. I should have kept it.
Was there a bigger production team, or was it just you?
No, I had a staff of people that were making harnesses and things of that nature. It wasn't just me. I mean, even when you're doing a small production run, it can get overwhelming very quickly. And so it wasn't just me, but I had maybe 10 people. And everything that I did, the circuit boards were farmed out. I was shopping those out to manufacturers who were stuffing the boards for me. And I had a guy named Glenn, what was his last name? He was the one who was designing all the metal plates and the plastic parts for me, and all that. So I was strictly doing the circuit board layout and the software. That was my end of it. And they took my boards and mated it onto a metal frame with a PC Engine. It was nice looking, but it was clearly industrial. It wasn't designed to be an enclosed home product, in a plastic box or whatever, like you would play a Nintendo. It was a strictly industrial OEM design on a metal plate with plastic parts and everything, strictly designed to be in an arcade enclosure.
Okay, sounds cool. So after that, what did you end up doing? And what are you doing now?
Well, In the late 90s, I saw the writing on the wall that the arcade game industry was dying out. Many of the stores that used to have, the maximum number of games they could put in the store, all of a sudden the games weren't earning money anymore, and the stores decided that a rack of potato chips, snack food, and I saw that happening. So I it's funny because I told you before that I have every new direction I've gone in life has been accidental, and getting into casino games was no different. When I was doing arcade game repair for a company in Southern California, the guy had a slot machine in the store. I said, "What's that slot machine doing in an arcade store?" And he said, "The guy who owns that is looking for a programmer." I said, "Okay, well, I'm a programmer. I'll take that. I'll take that job on." And I started doing it, and I discovered I could make slot machines. I said, "Well, since the arcade game industry is dying out, maybe I'll just go to Vegas and make slot machines." And that's what I did. I mean, it seemed like a natural progression since, back at that time, casino games were coin op just as well as arcade games were. And now I'm doing apps, iPhone and iPad apps, about to release some new stuff.
Okay, so you want to go ahead and promote your new venture. Go ahead.
Sure, okay. I'm working on a new multi-game slot machine system. I can't divulge a couple of details about it because they are unique to what I've done, but I will say that I'm porting these over for casino use, and I think that could be a pretty big thing down the road here. I did a game called Silver Strike recently. That is currently being shipped to casinos all over the country. It's a novelty game that vends silver coins when you hit winners. Hardware, software, and it's all pretty much casino related right now.
All right, sounds great. Okay, Rick, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting time talking to you. Very wonderful stories. Learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has. And let's keep in touch. And the people who watch this and listen to this, if they have any questions, maybe I can get back to you sometime, fill out some of the answers that they might be looking for in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good talking to you.